Dad, she looks so sad.
Dad, she looks
Annie
so
gently
sad.
pulled on William's hand under the table, not enough to interrupt him abruptly, but enough that he knew she wasn't going to let this go. Dad, look, she whispered
Daddy,
again,
look.
leaning slightly toward him and trying not to be obvious. William didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on the menu even though he had already ordered. Annie, sit properly. Don't stare at people. It's not polite. But Dad, she lowered her voice. She's really sad. Annie, she keeps crying, Annie insisted softly. She tries to eat, then she stops, then she wipes her eyes like she doesn't want anyone to see. And she keeps touching her ring. William frowned slightly but still didn't turn around. Touching her ring? Annie nodded, her voice small but very serious. Yeah. She keeps turning it. Like this. Annie twisted her fingers to demonstrate. She spins it slowly, then she just sits there. Then she wipes her eyes again. And then she took the ring off and just held it in her hand for a long time. That made William pause. She took it off? He asked. Annie nodded. And then she put it back on. And then she took it off again. Dad, I think something really bad happened to her. William finally sighed and leaned back in his chair. The restaurant was warm, filled with the comfortable noise of a Saturday evening, plates clinking, low conversations, a burst of laughter from the bar. Before he could turn around, a familiar voice appeared beside the table. Well, if it isn't the busiest billionaire in the city pretending he has time to eat a quiet dinner. William looked up and smirked slightly. Frank, if you're going to insult me, at least bring me better steak. Frank Dawson, the owner of the restaurant and William's longtime friend, pulled out the empty chair and sat down like he owned the place, which he did. Frank was in his early 50s, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, the look of a man who had worked for everything he had and was proud of it. He looked at Annie and smiled warmly. Hey there. How's the lemonade? Annie gave him a small smile. It's good, Mr. Frank. Frank looked between the two of them. Everything all right here? You look like you're trying to solve a very serious problem. Annie leaned a little closer and whispered like she was sharing an important secret. Mr. Frank, there's a lady over there and she's really, really sad. She keeps crying but she tries to hide it. Frank's expression changed slightly. Not surprised. Not confused. Just understanding. She's been here a few nights this week, Frank said quietly. William looked at him. What? Frank nodded subtly toward the window without turning his head. Same table, orders dinner, barely eats. Sits there about an hour. Sometimes she cries. Sometimes she just stares out the window. He paused. Always alone. Annie looked heartbroken. She comes here alone every day? Almost every day, Frank said gently. My waitresses told me she's very polite. Always says thank you. Always tips. Even though she doesn't eat much. Annie looked down at her hands. That's really sad. Frank gave her a kind smile. You have a good heart, Annie. Not many people notice things like that. At that exact moment, something small and shiny rolled across the wooden floor and gently tapped against William's shoe. All three of them looked down at the same time. It was a ring, a simple wedding ring, slightly worn, like it had been taken off and put back on many times over the years. It must have slipped from someone's fingers and rolled across the floor between tables until it stopped right at William's foot. William bent down and picked it up. The moment the metal touched his fingers, he felt a strange heaviness in his chest, like he already knew who it belonged to before he even looked up. He stood and turned toward the direction the ring had come from. Laura was standing near the window, her face pale, her hand frozen midair as if she had just realized the ring was gone. Her eyes met his first confusion, then recognition, then shock. The color drained from her face so fast it was almost frightening. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For a second, they just stared at each other across the restaurant, 10 years of memories, mistakes, and silence passing between them without a single word. William walked toward her slowly and held out his hand. You dropped this, he said. Laura looked at the ring in his palm but didn't take it right away. Her hand started to tremble. When she finally reached out, her fingers brushed his for the briefest second, and she flinched like the contact burned. Thank you, she whispered, not looking him in the eyes. Then she made the mistake of looking up. The moment she truly saw his face up close, panic replaced the shock. Her eyes filled with tears instantly, and she quickly looked away, turning her face so he wouldn't see her cry. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, her voice shaking. I have to go." Before William could say a word, she turned, almost rushed to the front counter, pulled cash from her purse with shaking hands, and handed it to the cashier. "She's leaving," Annie said softly from behind him. Laura didn't wait for the change. She grabbed her bag and hurried out into the night. Frank walked up beside William and looked toward the door. "That's the fastest she's ever left," he said quietly. William was still holding his hand slightly in the air, like he could still feel the brief touch of her fingers. "Hey," Frank said, looking at him carefully. "You okay?" William didn't take his eyes off the door. "Yeah," he said, but his voice was distant. I need to talk to her." Annie slid her hand into his immediately. "I'm coming with you," she said. William looked down at her. "You don't have to. She shouldn't cry alone," Annie said. "Nobody should cry alone in a restaurant." Frank looked at William, then at Annie, and gave a small nod like he understood something without needing it explained. "Go," Frank said quietly. "I'll take care of the bill." William put his hand gently on Annie's shoulder, and together, they walked toward the door, toward the woman who had once broken his heart, and was now running away again into the night. William pushed the restaurant door open and stepped out into the cool night air, Annie's small hand still wrapped tightly around his. The parking lot was lit by tall yellow lights that cast long shadows across the pavement. For a second, he didn't see her, and a strange panic rose in his chest, the same kind of panic he had felt 10 years ago when he came home to an empty apartment and a letter on the table. Then Annie pointed. "Dad." There, Laura was walking fast toward the far end of the parking lot, her head down, one hand gripping her bag, the other pressed against her mouth like she was trying to hold something in a sob, a breath, a memory. He didn't know. "Laura," William called out. She stopped. Her shoulders froze, but she didn't turn around right away. For a moment, she just stood there under the parking lot light, her back to him, like she was deciding whether to run again or not. William walked closer, slower now, Annie beside him. He could hear Laura take a shaky breath before she finally turned around. Up close, she looked worse than she had inside the restaurant. Her eyes were red, her mascara slightly smudged, and there was a kind of exhaustion in her face that didn't come from one bad day. It looked like it came from years of bad days. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, before he could speak. "I didn't know you came here. I won't come back again." "I didn't ask you to leave," William said. Laura shook her head quickly. "No, but I shouldn't be here. This is your world now." She gave a small, sad gesture toward the restaurant behind him. "Not mine." Annie looked between them, confused but quiet, sensing that this was a conversation full of history she didn't know yet. William crossed his arms slightly. "You saw me and ran." Laura looked down at the ground. "I didn't run. You practically sprinted to the door." She let out a small breath that almost sounded like a broken laugh. "Some habits don't change, I guess." There was a long silence. Finally, Laura spoke again, very quietly. "You look, well." William didn't answer that. Instead, he said, "You've been coming here every night. Frank told me." She looked embarrassed, like a child caught doing something she couldn't explain. "It's the only place that feels normal," she said. "No one asks questions. I can sit there and just be another person eating dinner." "You don't eat," William said. "You just sit there and cry." Laura closed her eyes for a second, like she wished the ground would open up and swallow her. "I try not to," she said. Annie slowly stepped a little closer to Laura. "Are you sick?" she asked gently. Both adults looked at her, surprised. Laura quickly wiped her eyes and forced a small smile. "No, sweetheart. I'm not sick." "Then why do you look like you're in pain?" Annie asked. Laura didn't know how to answer that, so she didn't. She just looked at William instead. "You have a daughter," she said softly. William nodded. "I adopted her." Laura looked down at Annie again, really looking this time. Annie looked back without fear, just curiosity and concern. "She's very lucky," Laura said. Annie shook her head. "No, I'm the lucky one." William felt something twist in his chest at that. but he kept his face calm. Laura held the ring in her hand again, the one he had picked up from the floor. She hadn't put it back on this time. She just turned it slowly between her fingers, over and over. "You're still wearing it," William said before he could stop himself. Laura looked at the ring and then gave a small, tired smile. "I don't know why," she admitted. "Habit, I guess. Or maybe I just needed to remind myself that some choices only need to be made once to change your whole life." William studied her face. "He left you. It wasn't a question." Laura nodded slowly. "A long time ago. And the ring? He gave it to me," she said. "I kept it because, I don't know. Maybe to remind myself what I traded my life for." Annie looked up at William. "Dad, why is she talking like that?" William looked down at Annie, then back at Laura. "Because," he said quietly, "sometimes adults make decisions they regret for the rest of their lives." Laura's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't wipe them away right away. "I didn't come here to ruin your night," she said, "or your life. I heard about this place from someone I work with. I didn't know it was yours. I didn't know you would be here." "I don't own the place," William said. "Frank does." "You might as well," she said softly. "This whole city has your name on it now." William didn't respond to that. Success was a strange thing. People thought it erased the past. It didn't. It just made the past quieter, not gone. Laura took a small step back. "I should go," she said. "I've already caused enough trouble for one night." She turned slightly, ready to walk away again. "Laura," she stopped but didn't turn around this time. William's voice was steady, but quieter than before. "Why did you take the ring off tonight?" Laura stood very still. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "Because I was finally ready to admit I made the biggest mistake of my life." Annie tightened her grip on William's hand. Laura turned back slowly, her eyes moving from William to Annie and back again. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not just for tonight, for everything. For who I was back then. I was young and scared of being poor, and I thought money meant safety. I thought if I left you, I'd have an easier life." She swallowed, her voice shaking. "I was wrong." William didn't say anything. "I see you on the news sometimes," she continued. "I see your company, your interviews, your house in those magazines at the grocery store checkout. And every time I see you, I think the same thing." "What?" William asked. She looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "That man was supposed to be my husband, and I traded him for a house that was never really a home." If this story touched your heart, please like the video, leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. The parking lot felt very quiet. Annie looked up at William again, then at Laura. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. "Are you going to cry again?" Annie asked Laura gently. Laura gave a small broken laugh. "Probably." Annie thought for a moment, then let go of William's hand and walked over to Laura. She reached into her small jacket pocket and pulled out a slightly crumpled napkin she had taken from the restaurant. She held it out to Laura. "Here," Annie said, "in case you need it again." Laura looked down at the napkin in Annie's small hand like it was the most precious thing anyone had ever offered her. "Thank you," she said softly, taking it. Her fingers were cold when they brushed Annie's. She dabbed under her eyes and gave a small, embarrassed smile. "I'm sorry you had to see me like this." Annie shrugged in a very matter-of-fact way. "I cry in public sometimes too," she said. "Usually at school. Or in the grocery store once. Dad bought the wrong cereal." For the first time that night, Laura laughed. It was a small laugh, a fragile one, but real. William watched that laugh carefully. He hadn't heard that sound in more than 10 years, but he would have recognized it anywhere. Laura folded the napkin carefully instead of throwing it away, like she wanted to keep it. "You shouldn't be out here," she said to Annie. "It's cold." "I'm okay," Annie said. Then she pointed to the ring still in Laura's hand. "Are you going to put it back on again, or are you done with it?" Laura looked down at the ring like Annie had just asked the most honest question in the world. "I don't know," she admitted. William spoke quietly. "You said you made the biggest mistake of your life." Laura nodded slowly. "I did." "Leaving me?" he asked. She looked at him, and this time she didn't look away. Yes, she said. But not just leaving you. It was who I became after I left you. That was the bigger mistake. William didn't expect that answer, and it showed on his face. Laura took a slow breath. When I left, I told myself a story, she said. I told myself that love doesn't pay bills, that being poor is the worst thing that can happen to you, that if I didn't leave, I'd spend my whole life struggling. She gave a small, sad smile. Turns out, struggling with the wrong person is a lot worse than being poor with the right one. They stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of that sentence settling over all three of them. Annie looked up at William. Dad, were you poor before? William gave a small nod. Very. Like, no food poor? Sometimes, he said. Annie looked back at Laura. Then why did you leave him? Laura didn't seem offended by the question. If anything, she looked like she had been asking herself that same question for 10 years. Because I was scared, she said simply. I grew up poor. I watched my mom work 2 jobs and still not have enough money. I watched the electricity get shut off. I watched her cry over bills. And when I saw my future starting to look like her life, I panicked. She looked at William. You had dreams. Big dreams. But dreams don't look real when the rent is due. William crossed his arms slightly. So you chose a man with money instead. Laura nodded. Yes. And were you happy? He asked. She shook her head slowly. No. Did he love you? Another slow shake of the head. No. Did you love him? She hesitated this time, then said quietly, I tried to. William looked away for a moment, staring out toward the street beyond the parking lot. Cars passed. People walked by. Life kept moving like it always did. No matter who was standing in a parking lot, reliving the worst and most important decisions of their life. Annie spoke again, her voice thoughtful. So you left Dad because you were scared to be poor, and then you were scared to be lonely, and now you're just sad. Laura let out a small breath. That's a pretty good summary. Annie nodded like she had just solved a math problem. Then she looked at William very seriously. Dad, she said, are you still mad at her? William didn't answer right away. That was a question he had asked himself in different ways for 10 years. He had been mad. Then he had been hurt. Then he had been busy. Then he had been successful. Then he had been a father. Somewhere along the way, the anger had turned into something else, something quieter, something heavier. I don't know, he said honestly. I was mad for a long time. Laura looked down at the ring again. You should have been, she said. You had every right to be. William studied her face. There was no arrogance there anymore. No impatience. No look that said she was waiting for a better life somewhere else. Just regret, and exhaustion, and loneliness. What happened to you? He asked finally. After you left. Laura was quiet for a moment, like she was deciding how much truth she deserved to tell. At first, she said, everything looked perfect. Big house, nice car, expensive clothes. We went to parties where everyone smiled and no one meant it. I didn't have to worry about bills anymore. And then? William asked. And then I realized I had married a man who loved winning more than he loved people, she said. I was just one more thing he had won. William said nothing. He didn't hit me, Laura continued quietly. So from the outside, everyone thought I was lucky. But he controlled everything. What I wore, who I talked to, where I went. He used to tell me, I paid for this life, so you live it the way I want. Annie frowned. That's not nice. No, Laura said softly. It wasn't. What happened then? Annie asked. Laura looked at the ring one more time, then slowly closed her fingers around it. Then one day, he found someone younger, she said. And suddenly, I was replaceable. William felt something cold settle in his chest. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just the quiet confirmation that life had a way of balancing things out, without asking anyone's permission. He left, Laura said. The house was in his name. The cars were in his name. The bank accounts were in his name. Turns out, when you marry for money, the money never really belongs to you. Annie was very quiet now, listening carefully. So now you're alone, William said. Laura nodded. Yeah, They stood there under the parking lot lights of Billionaire, a woman with a ring in her hand and nowhere to go, and a child who seemed to understand more about life than most adults. Laura took a small step back. "I really am sorry," she said again, "for all of it. But I don't expect anything from you. I needed you to know that leaving you was the worst decision I ever made." She looked at Annie and gave her a gentle smile. "You have a good dad," she said. "He was a good man even when he had nothing." William felt that sentence more than he expected to. Laura turned slightly, preparing to leave again. "Goodbye, William." She started to walk away. "Laura," he said. She stopped. William took a slow breath, then said the one thing he didn't think he would ever say to her again. "Have dinner with us tomorrow," he said. "You shouldn't have to eat alone every night." Laura turned back slowly, her eyes wide in shock. "Why?" she asked. William looked at Annie, then back at Laura. "Because," he said quietly, "I know what it feels like to eat alone and pretend you're not sad." Laura stood very still, like she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. "Dinner?" she repeated quietly. William nodded once. "Tomorrow, with us." Laura looked down at the ring in her hand, then back at him. "William, you don't owe me kindness, not after what I did." "That's not why I'm asking," he said. "Then why?" she asked. Before William could answer, Annie spoke first. "Because eating alone is the worst," Annie said simply. "It feels like nobody in the world knows where you are." Laura looked at her, and something in her expression broke a little more, but in a softer way this time, not the sharp pain from earlier. "I don't want to cause problems for you," Laura said, looking back at William. "You have a life now, a big life. Important people, important work. The last thing you need is someone like me showing up again." William almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You think my life is too big for uncomfortable dinners? I think your life is too big for old mistakes," she said. He shook his head slightly. "You're not an old mistake, Laura. You're a person I used to love, who made a bad decision. That's different." The word love hung in the air for a second before either of them could catch it and put it away. Laura swallowed. "Used to," she said quietly. William didn't respond to that. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card, and held it out to her. 7 o'clock, he said. "There's an address on there. Just dinner. Nothing else. No past, no future. Just dinner." Laura looked at the card but didn't take it right away. "And if I don't come?" William put the card into her hand anyway. "Then you don't come." She closed her fingers around the card like it might disappear if she didn't hold it tight enough. Annie smiled up at her. "You should come," she said. "My dad doesn't invite people to dinner. He barely invites people into the house." Laura looked surprised. "Is that true?" Annie nodded very seriously. "He doesn't like people very much." William sighed. "That's not true." "It is a little true," Annie said. For the first time, Laura smiled without sadness being the first thing on her face. It was a small smile, but it looked like the woman William used to know, the one who used to laugh at things that weren't that funny just because he said them. "I'll think about it," Laura said. "That's all I'm asking," William replied. She took a step back, then another. "Good night, William." "Good night, Laura." She looked down at Annie. "Good night, sweetheart." "Thank you for the napkin." Annie waved. "See you tomorrow, I hope." Laura nodded once, then turned and walked toward the bus stop at the end of the street instead of toward a car. William noticed that immediately. "You don't have a car?" he asked. Laura stopped, turned back, and shook her head. "Not anymore." He wanted to ask more, but he didn't. 10 years had already taken enough dignity from both of them. He wasn't going to take what little she had left by making her explain how far she had fallen. "Good night, Laura," he said again. "Good night." She walked away this time for real, her figure getting smaller under the streetlights until she disappeared around the corner. Annie was quiet for a long time after that. Then she looked up at William and asked, "Were you really in love with her?" William stared at the empty corner where Laura had disappeared. "Yeah," he said. "I was. Did she break your heart?" He thought about that question carefully. "Yes," he said, "but that's not the whole story." "What's the whole story?" Annie asked. William looked down at her. The whole story is that I gave my heart to someone when I had nothing, he said. And when she left, I decided I would never have nothing again. Annie squeezed his hand. So you became rich? Yeah. Did it fix your heart? William looked back at the street, at the place where the past had just walked away again. No, he said. It just made the house bigger. They walked back into the restaurant slowly. Frank was waiting near the table, arms crossed, the bill already gone. Well, Frank asked. William put on his jacket. I invited her to dinner tomorrow. Frank raised his eyebrows. That's either a very good idea or a very bad one. Probably both, William said. They sat back down for a moment so Annie could finish her fries. Frank slid into the chair again and lowered his voice. That her? Frank asked quietly. William nodded. The one who left? Yeah. Frank whistled softly. Life's got a strange sense of humor. Annie looked between them. She's not mean, Annie said. She's just sad. Frank looked at William. Sometimes sad people do the most damage, he said gently. Not because they're evil, because they're scared. William nodded slowly. I know. Frank studied his friend's face for a moment. You still love her? William didn't answer right away. He looked at Annie, who was dipping a French fry into ketchup very carefully like this was the most important task in the world. I don't know what I feel, William said finally. But I know I don't want her eating dinner alone every night and crying into a napkin in your restaurant. Frank leaned back. You always did have a soft spot for lost causes. William gave a small, tired smile. She's not a lost cause. Frank shrugged. Then what is she? William watched Annie for a moment before answering. She's someone who made a terrible decision and has been punishing herself for it every day since, he said. I know what that looks like. I see it in the mirror sometimes. Frank didn't joke after that. They finished dinner quietly. On the drive home, Annie sat in the back seat, looking out the window. Dad? She said after a while. Yeah? Are you lonely? The question was so direct it almost made him laugh, but he didn't. Sometimes, he said. Me too, Annie said softly. Not all the time, but sometimes at night, when it's really quiet. William tightened his hands slightly on the steering wheel. You can always come wake me up, he said. I know, Annie said, but I think grown-ups get lonely in a different way. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. What do you mean? I think kids get lonely when nobody is there, she said. But grown-ups get lonely even when people are there. William looked back at the road, the streetlights passing one by one. That's a pretty smart thing to know, he said. Annie shrugged. I watch people a lot. They drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. When they pulled into the driveway of the large, quiet house, Annie didn't get out right away. Do you think she'll come tomorrow? Annie asked. William turned off the engine and sat there for a moment before answering. I don't know, he said honestly. Do you want her to? Annie asked. William looked at the dark windows of his house, then thought about a small table by the window in a restaurant where a woman sat alone every night pretending to eat while she cried. Yes, he said quietly. I think I do. William didn't sleep much that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the house quiet around him, the kind of quiet that only big houses have a hollow, echoing quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world awake at 3 a.m. He hadn't thought about Laura in years. Not really. Not in a way that hurt. Sometimes he would see something that reminded him of her, a song they used to listen to, a cheap brand of instant noodles at the grocery store, a girl laughing in a way that sounded like the past, but he had trained himself to move past those moments quickly. He had work to do, a company to build, employees who depended on him. And then Annie came into his life, and she became the center of everything. But now Laura was back. Not the Laura from 10 years ago, not the girl who left because she was tired of being poor. This Laura looked like life had taken something from her and never given it back. Around midnight, William got up and walked downstairs. The house was dark, except for the kitchen light he left on for Annie every night, in case she woke up and got scared. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out at the empty street. He remembered a night a long time ago, in a different apartment, when he and Laura had sat on the floor because they couldn't afford a couch yet. They had eaten takeout from one container with 2 plastic forks, laughing about how one day they would have a big dining table and real plates. He got the big house. The big dining table. The real plates. Just not the life he imagined sitting on that floor. You're thinking about her? William turned slightly. Annie was standing at the bottom of the stairs in her pajamas, her hair messy from sleep, holding the railing with one hand. You should be in bed, he said gently. Annie walked into the kitchen and climbed onto one of the tall chairs. I woke up and you weren't there, she said. I told you sometimes I get lonely at night. William handed her a glass of milk without saying anything. She took a small sip, then looked at him over the rim of the glass. Are you scared? She asked. Of what? He said. Of her, Annie said. William leaned against the counter and thought about that question. I'm not scared of her, he said slowly. I'm scared of how I used to feel about her. Annie nodded like that made perfect sense. Feelings are scary, she said, because you can't put them in a safe. William smiled a little at that. That's true. Are you going to be sad if she doesn't come tomorrow? Annie asked. William didn't answer right away. He looked down at the kitchen table, a big, expensive table that could seat 10 people, but most nights it only seated 2. Yes, he said finally. I think I will be. Annie slid off the chair and walked over to him. She hugged him around the waist and squeezed tight. Then I hope she comes, she said into his shirt, because I don't like it when you look sad and pretend you're not. William rested his hand on the top of her head. Go back to bed, he said softly. Okay, Annie said. Then she looked up at him. If she comes tomorrow, can I sit between you? He almost laughed. Why? So neither of you can run away, Annie said, completely serious. William looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, he said. You can sit between us. The next day felt longer than it should have. William tried to work, but he kept checking the time. He went through meetings, signed documents, answered calls, but his mind kept drifting back to a woman sitting alone at a table, turning a ring around her finger and trying not to cry. By late afternoon, he gave up pretending to work and went home early. He told himself it was because he wanted to have dinner ready for Annie. That wasn't the real reason, and he knew it. At 6:30, Annie was already dressed and sitting on the couch, waiting. You're nervous, she said. I'm not nervous, William replied. You cleaned the kitchen twice, Annie said. And you changed your shirt. William looked down at his shirt and frowned slightly. This is a normal shirt. Annie just looked at him in that way she had that made him feel like she understood more than she should. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Annie jumped off the couch and looked at William with wide eyes. That's her, she whispered. William walked to the door slowly, his heart beating harder than he expected. For a man who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without flinching, it was a strange feeling to be nervous about opening his own front door. He opened it. Laura stood on the porch, holding a small paper bag with both hands like she needed something to hold on to. She was wearing a simple dress and a light sweater. Her hair was brushed, and she looked like she had tried very hard to look like someone who belonged on this porch. I almost didn't come, she said immediately. I know, William said. She held up the paper bag slightly. I brought dinner rolls, she said. I didn't know what else to bring to a billionaire's house, so I brought bread. For the first time since he had seen her again, William laughed. A real laugh. Come inside, Laura, he said. Laura stepped inside slowly, like she was afraid the house might reject her if she moved too fast. People who had never been poor thought big houses were impressive. People who had been poor often just thought they were very quiet. Your house is beautiful, she said politely. Thank you, William replied. Dinner's almost ready. Annie appeared in the hallway like she had been waiting there the whole time. You came, she said, smiling in a way that made Laura's nervousness ease just a little. I said I would try, Laura said. Annie looked at the paper bag in Laura's hands. Is that the bread? Laura smiled, a little embarrassed. Yes. I didn't know what else to bring. Annie took the bag very seriously. Bread is important, she said. Dad says you can tell if a restaurant is good by the bread. William raised an eyebrow from the kitchen. I said that once. But it was true, Annie replied. Laura followed Annie into the dining room and stopped when she saw the table. It was large, polished wood, set with real plates, cloth napkins, and glasses that probably cost more than everything she owned in her apartment. 10 years ago, she and William had eaten on a wobbly table they found at a yard sale for $20. Sit wherever you want, William said from the kitchen. Annie immediately pulled out the chair in the middle on one side of the table. "I'm sitting here," she announced, then pointed to the chairs on either side of her. "You sit there," she said to Laura, "and Dad sits there." Laura looked at William, slightly confused. "So neither of you can run away," Annie explained. William shook his head slightly, but there was a small smile on his face. "That seems to be the seating arrangement," he said. They sat down. For a moment, no one spoke. The kind of silence that isn't empty, it's full of things people don't know how to say yet. William brought the food to the table. Nothing fancy. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. The kind of meal people eat when they want something to feel normal. Laura noticed that immediately. "This isn't billionaire food," she said quietly. William sat down across from her. "This is the food we used to eat when we were happy," he said. "Just slightly better ingredients." Laura looked down at her plate for a moment, and he could see her trying not to cry again. Annie noticed too. She reached over and gently pushed the bowl of mashed potatoes toward Laura. "You should eat," she said. "You didn't eat last night." Laura looked surprised. "You noticed that?" Annie nodded. "You were too busy being sad." Laura let out a small breath that almost turned into a laugh. "You're very honest." "I don't know how to lie yet," Annie said. They started eating slowly. At first, the conversation was careful, like everyone was walking across thin ice. "So," Laura said, "Annie tells me you adopted her." William nodded. 6 years ago." Laura looked at Annie. "Do you remember before that?" Annie nodded. "Yeah, I remember waiting a lot." William looked down at his plate. He had heard Annie talk about the adoption before, but it always hit him in a different place every time she said something like that. "I didn't want to go with him at first," Annie continued, pointing her fork at William. Laura looked surprised. "You didn't?" Annie shook her head. "No. I thought he would bring me back." William looked up. "You never told me that." Annie shrugged. "I didn't want you to feel bad." The room went quiet for a second. Laura looked at William. "You stayed," she said quietly. William met her eyes. "Yeah," he said. "I stayed." They held that eye contact a second longer than necessary, both of them understanding that they weren't talking about Annie anymore. Laura looked down at her hands. She wasn't wearing the ring tonight. "I sold it," she said suddenly. William frowned slightly. "What?" "The ring," she said. "This morning, I sold it." "Why?" Annie asked. Laura gave a small, sad smile. "Because I didn't want to keep carrying a reminder of a life that was never really mine." William studied her face. "What did you do with the money?" Laura hesitated, like she wasn't sure if she should say it. "I paid 2 months of rent," she said. "And I bought groceries. And I bought those dinner rolls." Annie looked at the bread basket like it had just become the most important thing on the table. "You bought us bread with your ring money?" Annie asked. Laura nodded, a little embarrassed. "I didn't want to come here empty-handed." Annie thought about that very seriously, then said, "That means this is very expensive bread." Laura laughed again, and this time William felt something in his chest loosen. He had forgotten how her laugh could change the feeling of a room. They ate for a while, and the conversation slowly became easier. Laura talked about the small jobs she had now, working mornings at a dry cleaner, evenings at a grocery store. William talked a little about work, but not much. Annie talked about school, her teacher, a boy who cheated at spelling tests, and how she wanted a dog even though William kept saying no. At one point, Annie looked at both of them and said, "You both look less sad when you talk to each other." Neither adult knew how to respond to that. After dinner, Annie insisted that Laura help her dry the dishes while William washed them. The three of them stood in the kitchen like a strange version of a family that didn't quite exist yet. "Careful, that one's slippery," Laura said, as Annie almost dropped a plate. "I got it," Annie said. Then she looked at Laura and asked, "Are you going to leave again?" The question was so direct that Laura froze. She started, but no words came out. Annie continued, very calmly, "Because if you are, you shouldn't come over a lot. Dad pretends he's okay when people leave, but he's not." William stopped washing dishes but didn't turn around. Laura looked at Annie, then at William's back, then back at Annie. Her eyes filled with tears again, but she didn't look away this time. "I'm not planning to leave," she said quietly. But I don't know if I'm allowed to stay. Annie handed her a towel. You can stay for dishes, she said. We'll decide the rest later. William let out a quiet breath at the sink, water running over his hands. And for the first time in 10 years, the house didn't feel quite so big and empty. After the dishes were done, Annie disappeared upstairs to get ready for bed, leaving William and Laura alone in the kitchen with the soft sound of the dishwasher humming in the background. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Laura dried her hands slowly with the towel Annie had given her, buying time, gathering courage, trying to find the right words in a room full of old memories and new silence. This house is very quiet, she said finally. William leaned back against the counter. Yeah, he said. Big houses are like that. It's a nice quiet, she said politely. He shook his head slightly. No, he said. It's a lonely quiet. There's a difference. Laura looked at him then, really looked at him, like she was seeing the man he had become and the man he used to be at the same time. I used to imagine what your life would look like, she said. After I left. What did you imagine? He asked. She gave a small, sad smile. I imagined you'd become successful. You were always the most determined person I knew. I imagined you'd have a big house, a beautiful wife, maybe 2 kids, a golden retriever, the kind of life people put on Christmas cards. William almost smiled. I got the house, he said. That's about it. Laura looked down. I'm sorry, she said again, quietly. I know saying that doesn't fix anything. No, William said. It doesn't. But I believe you mean it. They stood there for a moment, the past sitting quietly between them like an old photograph neither of them knew where to put. Why did you really invite me here, William? She asked finally. Not the polite reason, the real one. He thought about that question carefully before answering. Because I saw you sitting alone every night in Frank's restaurant crying into a napkin, he said. And I realized something. What? She asked. That I spent 10 years trying to prove that you made a mistake leaving me, he said. And I did. I built everything, more than I ever said I would. But when I saw you last night, I didn't feel like I won. Laura's eyes filled again, but she didn't interrupt him. I felt like we both lost, he said. Laura sat down slowly at the kitchen table like her legs suddenly didn't have the strength to hold her. That's exactly how it feels, she whispered. Like we both lost something we can't get back. William walked over and sat across from her, the same way they used to sit across from each other in that tiny apartment years ago. I used to hate you, he said, not cruelly, just honestly. For a long time, I hated you. Not because you left, but because you didn't even give me a chance to fight for us. You decided I wasn't enough, and you didn't even ask me if I wanted to try anyway. Laura nodded slowly, tears sliding quietly down her face. I know, she said. I was a coward. I thought I was being practical. I told myself I was choosing a better life. But really, I was just scared of struggling. She looked around the kitchen, at the expensive cabinets, the marble counters, the soft lighting. Do you know what the worst part is? She asked. What? William said. The worst part is that you were the only time in my life I felt safe, she said. And I left the only person who ever made me feel that way because I thought safety came from money. William didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. Laura wiped her eyes and laughed quietly at herself. I come here and cry in a restaurant because it's the only place I can sit for an hour and pretend I used to belong somewhere, she said. That's a pretty pathetic life for someone who once lived in a mansion. William leaned forward slightly. It's not pathetic, he said. It's just lonely. She looked at him. Are you lonely? She asked. Yes, he said, but in a different way. How? She asked. William thought about Annie upstairs, probably talking to her stuffed animals or reading with a flashlight under the blanket. I have someone who loves me, he said. But I don't have anyone who knew me when I had nothing. Laura closed her eyes when he said that, because she understood exactly what he meant. I knew you when you had nothing, she said quietly. Yeah, he said. You did. And I left anyway, she whispered. They sat there in silence for a long time. Finally, Laura stood up. I should go, she said. I've taken enough of your time. William didn't try to stop her this time. I'll drive you, he said. You don't have to, she replied quickly. I know, he said, but I want to. They grabbed their coats, and William called up the stairs. Annie, we're taking Laura home. I'll be back in a little while. Annie appeared at the top of the stairs immediately, like she had been listening the whole time. Okay, she said. Then she looked at Laura. You can come back again, she added. You don't have to wait until you're sad to come. Laura smiled up at her. Thank you, she said. That might be the nicest invitation I've ever had. The drive was quiet at first. Laura gave him directions to a small apartment on the older side of town, the kind of neighborhood William hadn't lived in for a very long time, but knew very well because it used to be his whole world. When they stopped in front of her building, Laura didn't open the door right away. William, she said quietly, looking straight ahead. Why are you being kind to me? He kept his hands on the steering wheel. Because someone was kind to me once when I had nothing, he said. And it changed my life. She turned to look at him. Who? He thought for a second, then said, a girl who used to eat instant noodles with me on the floor and tell me I was going to be something someday. Laura started crying again, but she was smiling this time. Good night, William, she said. Good night, Laura. She opened the car door, then paused and looked back at him one more time. I really am sorry, she said. Not because you're rich now, but because you were a good man when you were poor, and I was too blind to see that was the only thing that mattered. She got out of the car and walked into the building, leaving William sitting there in the quiet car, staring at the door long after she had disappeared inside. When William got home that night, the house felt different. Not less quiet, not smaller, just different. Like something had shifted slightly, like a door that had been closed for years was now open just a few inches, letting in air he didn't realize he had been missing. Annie was sitting on the couch in her pajamas, pretending to read but very obviously waiting for him. She lives in an apartment? Annie asked the moment he walked in. William took off his jacket and hung it by the door. Yeah. Is it small? Yes. Is it lonely? William looked at Annie for a moment. Yeah, he said. I think it is. Annie closed her book. You should invite her again, she said. We'll see, William replied. Annie studied his face. You already want to, she said. I can tell. William walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. You notice too much, he said. I have to, Annie said. That's how you understand people. You watch what they do when they think nobody is paying attention. William leaned against the counter and looked at her. Where did you learn that? Annie shrugged. Before I came to live with you, I had to watch people to know if they were going to be nice or not. That answer stayed in the room for a long time. William nodded slowly. I'm glad you don't have to do that anymore, he said. I still do, Annie said. But now I do it to help people, not to protect myself. William didn't know what to say to that. So he just reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently. Go get some sleep, he said. You have school tomorrow. Are you going to see her again? Annie asked. I don't know, he said honestly. But he did know. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. The next few days passed in a strange way. William went back to work. Back to meetings and numbers and decisions that affected thousands of people. On the outside, everything looked exactly the same. But inside, something kept pulling his thoughts back to a small apartment across town and a woman who had sold her wedding ring to pay rent and buy dinner rolls. On the third day, Frank called him. You going to tell me what's going on with you? Frank asked over the phone. What do you mean? William said. You've come into the restaurant twice this week and spent 10 minutes staring at the table by the window, Frank said. You don't even realize you're doing it. William didn't deny it. Has she been there? He asked. Frank was quiet for a second. No, he said. Not since that night you talked to her. William felt something drop in his stomach. Oh, you worried about her? Frank asked. William looked out the window of his office at the city he had spent 10 years building a place in. Yeah, he said. I think I am. Frank's sigh hit on the other end of the line. You know, I've known you a long time, he said. I remember you when you used to come into my first restaurant counting coins to see if you could afford a burger. William smiled slightly. Yeah, I remember. You worked like a dog to build everything you have. Frank continued. But don't make the mistake of thinking money fixes the past. It just makes the future more comfortable. William didn't say anything. Frank added one more thing before hanging up. If you care about her, don't wait too long to decide what you're going to do. Lonely people disappear quietly. That sentence stayed with William the rest of the day. That night, he found himself driving to the neighborhood Laura lived in, without really deciding to. He told himself he was just driving, just thinking, just passing by. But a few minutes later, he was parked across the street from her apartment building, sitting in his car with the engine off. The building looked older at night. One light flickered near the entrance. A couple argued quietly near the sidewalk. Somewhere, a dog barked. It was the kind of place where people worked hard and still worried about rent. It was the kind of place he used to live in. He sat there for a long time, arguing with himself. You don't belong here anymore. Maybe that's exactly why you should be here. You don't owe her anything. Maybe this isn't about owing. Maybe it's about not wanting someone to disappear. Finally, he got out of the car and walked to the entrance. He didn't even know what apartment number was hers, but the woman at the front desk looked up and said, "You here to see Laura?" William nodded, surprised. "Yeah, she's in 2B, the woman said. Then she smiled a little. "She's one of the nice ones. Always says hello. Always looks tired." William thanked her and walked up the stairs. When he reached apartment 2B, he stood there for a moment, staring at the door, wondering what he was doing. A billionaire standing in a hallway that smelled like old carpet and cheap cleaning supplies, about to knock on the door of the woman who had broken his heart 10 years ago. He knocked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he heard footsteps, and the door opened slowly. Laura stood there, wearing a loose t-shirt and sweatpants, her hair pulled back carelessly. She looked surprised, then confused, then something softer. "William," she said, "is everything okay? Is Annie okay?" He nodded. "Annie's fine." She opened the door a little wider. Then, "What are you doing here?" William looked at her, at the small apartment behind her, at the life she was living now, and he realized the answer was simpler than he had been making it. "I think," he said slowly, "I came here because I didn't want you to disappear again." Laura stared at him for a long moment, like she was trying to understand whether he was really standing in front of her door or if she had imagined it. "You came all the way here? To make sure I didn't disappear?" she asked quietly. William nodded. "Yeah." She opened the door wider. "You should come in," she said. "It's cold in the hallway." He stepped inside. The apartment was small but clean, a couch that had seen better days, a small kitchen table with 2 mismatched chairs, a lamp in the corner, and a few books stacked neatly against the wall. It smelled faintly like laundry detergent and cheap coffee. "It's not much," Laura said, a little embarrassed, "but it's enough." William looked around slowly. "I've lived in places smaller than this," he said. "I know," she replied softly. "I was there." They stood facing each other for a moment, unsure where to begin. "Do you want coffee?" she asked. "Sure," he said. She moved around the small kitchen, pouring water into a coffee maker that looked older than both of them felt. William sat at the small table, his knees almost touching the other chair because the space was tight. "This is strange," Laura said, not turning around. "What is?" he asked. "You sitting at my kitchen table," she said. 10 years ago, I sat at yours. Well, it was ours, but I gave that up when I left." William watched her quietly. "Why didn't you ever come back?" he asked. She stopped moving for a second, then continued making the coffee. "I wanted to," she said. "More times than you can imagine." "Then why didn't you?" he asked. She turned around and leaned against the counter, folding her arms like she was holding herself together. "Because I was ashamed," she said. "I left a good man because he was poor." How do you go back and explain that? How do you knock on that door and say, "Hi, I know I broke your heart and traded you for a bigger house, but it turns out that was a bad idea"? "You tell the truth," William said. She shook her head. "I didn't think I deserved to tell the truth. I thought I deserved to live with the decision I made." The coffee machine began to drip loudly in the quiet apartment. "I followed your life from a distance," she continued. "I saw your company grow. I saw interviews, awards, articles, self-made millionaire who came from nothing. She gave a small smile. I wanted to call you so many times, but every time I saw how successful you were, I thought, he's better off without me. I would have just slowed him down. William frowned slightly. You don't know that. I do know that I left, she said. That part is enough. She brought 2 mugs of coffee to the table and sat down across from him. I never had kids, she said after a moment. William looked up. You wanted them. Yeah, she said. But life doesn't always give you what you planned. And after the divorce, it just didn't happen. William nodded slowly. Annie changed my life, he said. I thought I was building a company to prove something. But really, I was just building a place that was too quiet until she showed up. Laura wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. She's a special kid, she said. She sees everything. Yeah, William said. She does. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee in the small apartment kitchen, 2 people who used to share a life now sitting like polite strangers who knew too much about each other. Why did you really come tonight? Laura asked again. You said you didn't want me to disappear. But why does that matter to you? After everything I did, why do you still care if I disappear? William thought about that question for a long time before answering. Because I know what it feels like to be left, he said finally. And I wouldn't wish that feeling on anyone. Not even you. Laura's eyes filled with tears again, but she didn't look away. I deserve that, she said. No, William said. You deserve to live with your decision. That's different from deserving to be miserable for the rest of your life. Laura stared at him like she didn't know what to do with that kind of kindness. You're a better man than I deserve, she said. William shook his head. No, he said. I'm just a man who knows what loneliness feels like. Laura looked down at her coffee. I am lonely, she admitted. I go to work, I come home, I eat something small, I watch TV, and then I go to sleep. And the next day is exactly the same. Then why don't you change it? He asked. She gave a small, sad laugh. It's harder to build a new life at 40 than people think. Especially when you built the first one on the wrong decision. William leaned back in the chair, which creaked slightly under his weight. You came to dinner, he said. That's a start. Laura smiled faintly. I almost didn't, she admitted. I stood outside your house for 5 minutes before I rang the bell. I kept thinking, this is his real life now. You don't belong here anymore. Did it feel like that inside too? He asked. She thought about it. No, she said slowly. It felt like a place I used to dream about. When we were young, a warm house, dinner on the table, people talking. It felt like a life we almost had. William didn't say anything because there was nothing to say to that. After a while, Laura looked at the clock and sighed. You should go, she said. You have work tomorrow, and Annie will wake up and wonder where you are. William stood up slowly. You'll come to dinner again? He asked. Laura looked surprised. You're inviting me again? I'm asking, he said. She hesitated. I don't want people to think I'm coming back because you're rich. William shrugged slightly. People already think things. They always do. You can't build your life based on what people who don't love you think. Laura looked at him for a long moment. You didn't used to talk like that, she said. Yeah, he said. I learned the hard way. He walked to the door, then turned back to her. Laura, he said. You made a bad decision 10 years ago, but that doesn't mean you have to spend the next 30 years punishing yourself for it. She didn't answer because she was trying not to cry again. He opened the door, then paused. Dinner on Sunday, he said. Annie will expect you. Laura smiled through her tears. Tell Annie I'll try not to run away, she said. William nodded. Good night, Laura. Good night, William. He walked down the hallway and out of the building, and Laura stood in the doorway for a long time after he left, holding the door open like she was afraid if she closed it, this second chance might disappear with it. William didn't realize how much he was thinking about Laura again until Sunday afternoon, when he found himself standing in the kitchen, staring at the same bag of potatoes for 5 full minutes without moving. Dad, Annie said from the doorway, you're holding one potato and looking at the other potatoes like they did something wrong. William blinked and looked down at his hand. I'm thinking, he said. You've been thinking about potatoes for a long time, Annie replied. He put the potato down and sighed. I'm not thinking about potatoes. You're thinking about Laura, Annie said. William looked at her. You don't miss much, do you? Annie walked into the kitchen and climbed onto one of the tall chairs. Is she coming today? She said she would try, William said. Annie nodded slowly. Trying usually means yes, but scared, she said. William almost smiled. That's a pretty accurate translation. They cooked dinner together, nothing fancy again. Spaghetti, salad, garlic bread. Annie insisted on making the salad even though she put too many tomatoes in and not enough lettuce. At 6:55, Annie was already sitting at the table, looking at the front door every few seconds. She's going to come, Annie said, mostly to herself. At exactly 7, the doorbell rang. Annie jumped out of her chair and ran to the door, but William walked past her and opened it first. Laura stood there again, this time holding a small container. I brought dessert, she said nervously. It's just something from the bakery where I work in the mornings. They let employees take home things that don't sell at the end of the day. That's perfect, William said. She stepped inside, and this time she looked a little less like she was entering a museum and a little more like she was entering a house. Annie took the dessert container very seriously. What is it? She asked. Apple pie, Laura said. Annie's eyes lit up. That's Dad's favorite. Laura looked surprised. It is? William nodded. It is. I didn't know that, Laura said quietly. I know, William replied, not unkindly. You weren't there long enough to learn all my favorites. The words hung in the air for a second, not said to hurt, just said because they were true. Laura nodded slowly. I guess I'm still learning, she said. They sat down for dinner, Annie once again sitting in the middle like a very small, very serious referee, making sure no one ran away. For a while, they talked about simple things, Annie's school, a funny story from the grocery store where Laura worked, a dog William had seen that morning that reminded Annie of the dog she still wanted. Halfway through dinner, Annie looked at Laura and asked, Do you have any friends? Laura looked surprised by the question. Not really, she admitted. I have people I work with, but not friends like family. Annie nodded like she understood. You can borrow us, she said. William almost choked on his water. Laura looked like she might cry again. Thank you, Laura said softly. That's very kind of you. After dinner, they ate the apple pie in the living room. Annie sat on the floor, Laura sat on one end of the couch, and William sat on the other. This is my favorite part of the house, Annie said, because this is where we sit when we're not busy. Laura looked around the room. There were pictures on the walls, mostly of Annie at different ages. School photos, drawings she had made. A photo from the day William adopted her. In the picture, Annie looked small and unsure. And William looked like a man who had just been handed something fragile and important. You look different in that picture, Laura said quietly. I was different, William said. You look scared, she said. I was, he admitted. I didn't know how to be a father. Annie looked up from the floor. He was bad at first, she said. He burned everything he tried to cook. That is not true, William said. It is a little true, Annie said. Laura laughed softly. I wish I could have seen that, she said. William looked at her. Yeah, he said. You probably would have laughed at me. I used to laugh at you a lot, she said. I know, he replied. They were quiet for a moment after that. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence anymore. It was the kind of silence people sit in when they are starting to get used to being in the same room again. Laura, Annie said suddenly, are you still sad all the time? Laura thought about the question before answering. Not all the time, she said. Just when I think about the past too much. Then maybe you should think about the future more, Annie said. Laura smiled gently. That's good advice, she said. But the future is a little scary when you're not sure where you belong. Annie looked around the room, then pointed at the couch, then at the kitchen, then at William. You can belong here a little, Annie said. You don't have to belong everywhere. Just somewhere is enough. William looked at Annie, then at Laura, and he could see that Annie's words had landed exactly where they needed to. Laura's eyes filled with tears again, but she was smiling when she said, You're a very wise little girl. I know, Annie said. They all laughed quietly after that. Later, when William walked Laura to the door, she put on her coat slowly, like she wasn't in a hurry to leave. Thank you, she said, for dinner, for not hating me. William leaned against the doorframe. I told you, he said. I was angry for a long time. But life is long, Laura. If you stay angry forever, you end up eating dinner alone for the rest of your life. She looked at him. And if you forgive too easily, she asked, then you risk getting hurt again, he said. So I guess we're both taking a risk. Laura nodded slowly. I'm tired of being alone, she said. William looked at her for a long moment before answering. Me too, he said. On Monday morning, the world reminded William that it did not care about second chances, old love, or quiet dinners with people who used to know you when you had nothing. The world cared about headlines, money, and stories that sounded interesting when written by people who didn't know you. William was walking into his office building when his assistant hurried toward him with an iPad in her hand and a worried look on her face. Good morning, Mr. Carter, she said quickly. We have a small situation. William stopped walking. What kind of situation? She turned the screen toward him. There was a photo on the screen, a very clear photo. It was him, standing in the parking lot outside Frank's restaurant. Annie was beside him, holding his hand. Laura was standing in front of them, her head slightly down, her face visible. The headline read, Billionaire William Carter seen meeting mystery woman late at night. Sources say she was the wife of a former millionaire who lost everything. William stared at the screen for a long moment, his face completely calm, but something cold settled in his chest. Who took this? He asked. We don't know yet, his assistant said, but there are already a few articles online. Nothing too aggressive yet, but they're asking questions about who she is and why you're meeting her at night in a parking lot. William handed the iPad back. Set up a meeting with legal, he said, and tell PR to prepare a statement that says nothing. His assistant nodded. Yes, sir. He walked into his office, closed the door, and stood there for a moment in silence. He had spent 10 years building a life where no one could hurt him the way he had been hurt before. He built walls made of money, success, and reputation. And now, just by talking to a woman in a parking lot, the world was already trying to turn it into something ugly. He picked up his phone and stared at Laura's number for a long time before calling. She answered on the third ring. Hello? Laura, he said. It's William. Her voice changed immediately. Is everything okay? Is Annie okay? Annie's fine, he said, but we have a small problem. He explained the article, the photo, the headline. There was silence on the other end of the line for a long time. I'm sorry, Laura said quietly. I didn't think anyone would care about me enough to take a picture. It's not about you, William said. It's about me. And anyone connected to me becomes a story. Laura's voice became very small. I don't want to ruin your life, she said. Or your company. Or Annie's life. I told you I shouldn't come back into your world. Stop, William said firmly. You didn't ruin anything. This is exactly why I didn't come back 10 years ago, she said. Your life was going to be big, and mine was always going to be small. People like me become problems in lives like yours. That's not how I see it, William said. That's how the world sees it, she replied. He couldn't argue with that, because in many ways, she was right. I can stop coming over, she said. That will fix it. People will get bored and write about someone else. William leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. He could already see what was happening. The same pattern. Laura deciding for both of them what the right thing was. Laura preparing to disappear so she wouldn't cause damage. Laura, he said quietly, don't make decisions for me again. She didn't answer. You did? After once. After time. After time. After 20 O's. After knife without you. You decided I deserved a different life. You decided you were a problem I didn't need, and you left. And you didn't even give me a choice. On the other end of the line, Laura was crying quietly, but she didn't hang up. I'm asking you this time, William said. Don't disappear because you think it's better for me. If you leave this time, I want it to be because it's what you want, not because you think you're doing me a favor. Laura tried to speak, but her voice broke. I don't know how to stay, she whispered. I only know how to leave when things get hard. William looked out the window of his office at the city below. Then learn, he said. Stay and learn. There was a long silence. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, he said. So am I. Another long silence. Then Laura said something very quietly. something that sounded like it cost her a lot to say. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she said. William closed his eyes for a second when he heard that. "Then don't be," he said. That evening, when William picked Annie up from school, she climbed into the car and immediately said, "Something bad happened." William looked at her in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean? A girl at school said you have a secret girlfriend and that's why you come to school events alone," Annie said. "And then another kid said my dad is in the news and that means we're rich." Rich. William tightened his hands on the steering wheel slightly. "Kids repeat what they hear their parents say," he said. Annie looked out the window. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. "No," William said. "We're just in a story that people don't understand." Annie thought about that for a moment. "Is Laura in the story too?" she asked. "Yes," William said. "Then we should make sure it's a good story," Annie said. William glanced at her in the mirror. "How do we do that?" Annie shrugged. "We don't run away. Only people who do bad things run away." William was quiet for a long time after that. That night, after Annie went to bed, he sat alone in the living room. The house quiet again. But now the quiet felt like a question instead of an empty space. He looked at his phone, at Laura's number, and thought about everything that could go wrong if she stayed in his life. Then he thought about everything that had already gone wrong when she left. Finally, he picked up the phone and sent a message. "We need to stop hiding. Come to the restaurant tomorrow night. Not as a secret. As my guest." Laura read William's message 3 times before she replied. "We need to stop hiding. Come to the restaurant tomorrow night. Not as a secret. As my guest." She sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment, the phone still in her hand, her heart beating faster with every second that passed. For 10 years, she had lived quietly, carefully, trying not to be noticed, trying not to cause problems, trying not to remind anyone, especially herself, of the biggest mistake she had ever made. And now William was asking her to step into the light with him, into a world where people took pictures, wrote stories, and judged things they didn't understand. Her phone buzzed again. It was another message from William. "I know you're scared. I am too. But I don't want to pretend you're someone I have to meet in parking lots." Laura stared at that sentence for a long time. Then she typed, "If I come, people will talk. They will say I came back because you're rich." His reply came almost immediately. "People already think that. You can't build your life around the opinions of people who don't know your story." She closed her eyes for a moment, then typed one more message. "Okay, I'll come." The next evening, Laura stood outside Frank's restaurant again, but this time she wasn't hiding inside before William arrived. This time, she was standing outside, looking through the window, her hands cold even though the evening was warm. She almost turned around twice, but then she remembered Annie sitting at the table between them saying, "So neither of you can run away." So she stayed. A black car pulled up in front of the restaurant, and William stepped out. He saw her immediately, standing there under the light, looking like she was about to either walk into the restaurant or walk away from his life for the second time. He walked up to her slowly. "You came," he said. "You asked me not to run," she replied. He nodded once. "Thank you." They stood there for a second, just looking at each other, both understanding that this moment was different from the parking lot, different from the small apartment, different from the quiet dinners at his house. This was public. This was real. This was a choice. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm here." "That's enough," he said. They walked inside together. Frank saw them immediately from behind the counter. His eyebrows went up slightly, but he didn't look surprised. He walked over, wiped his hands on a towel, and smiled. "Well," Frank said, looking at Laura, "it's nice to see you again. And this time, you're not sitting alone by the window." Laura smiled nervously. "No, I guess I'm not." Frank looked at William. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. William nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I am." Frank studied his face for a moment, then nodded once. "All right then," he said. "Your table's ready." They walked to the table by the window, the same table where Laura had sat alone so many nights, pretending to eat while she cried. This time she didn't sit alone. A few people in the restaurant recognized William. That was normal. But now they were also looking at Laura, whispering quietly, trying to figure out who she was, why she was with him, whether she belonged at that table. Laura noticed the looks immediately. Her shoulders tensed slightly, and she looked down at the menu even though she wasn't reading it. William noticed too. "Look at me," he said quietly. She looked up. "You don't have to be ashamed to sit at a dinner table," he said. "Not with me." She swallowed and nodded. A waiter came over, nervous because he recognized William. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," he said. "What can I get for you tonight?" William didn't open the menu. "Just bring us what you brought the other night," he said. "And bring dessert too." The waiter nodded quickly and left. Laura looked at William. "You didn't even ask me what I wanted," she said. He leaned back in his chair. "I know what you like," he said. "You always order the same thing when you're trying to feel normal." She looked surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember a lot of things," he said. She looked down at her hands. "I don't deserve that," she said quietly. "Stop saying that," William replied. "You made a bad decision. You didn't commit a crime." Laura looked around the restaurant again. People were still looking at them. But she noticed something else now. Some people weren't looking at her like she was a problem. Some were just curious. Some didn't care at all. "It feels strange," she said. "What does?" William asked. "Being seen," she said. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It does." After a moment, she said, "Are you sure this won't hurt your business? Your reputation?" William thought about that question carefully before answering. "Laura," he said, "if being seen having dinner with someone I used to love ruins my reputation, then I built the wrong reputation." She stared at him, and for the first time since she had walked into the restaurant, she stopped looking like she wanted to disappear. "You really have changed," she said. William shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I just stopped being afraid of losing things, because I already lost the thing that mattered most once." She knew he was talking about her. Dinner arrived, and for the first time since she had started coming to this restaurant, Laura actually ate her food while it was still hot. Halfway through the meal, she said quietly, "I used to sit at this table and watch couples talk and laugh and hold hands, and I would think, that was supposed to be me. That was supposed to be my life." William didn't interrupt. "And now I'm sitting here with you," she continued. "And I don't know if this is a second chance or just a goodbye that's taking longer than usual." William looked at her across the table, the same way he had looked at her across a much smaller table many years ago. "That depends," he said quietly, "on whether you run again." Laura held William's gaze across the table for a long time after he said that. "That depends on whether you run again." She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I told you before," she said quietly. "Running is the only thing I was ever good at when things got hard." William shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "You were good at loving me when life was easy. You just didn't know how to love me when life was hard." She flinched a little at the truth in that, but she didn't argue. "I was young," she said. "I thought love was supposed to make life easier. I didn't know love was the thing you hold on to when life gets harder." William didn't respond right away. The waiter came and refilled their water glasses, then left again, and the restaurant noise filled the silence between them. Laura looked around the room at couples talking, families eating, people laughing, then back at William. "Do you remember the night the electricity got shut off in our apartment?" she asked suddenly. William nodded. "Yeah," he said. "We lit candles and you said it was romantic." Laura smiled a little. "I was trying to make it less scary," she said. "I was always scared, William. I was scared of bills, scared of not having enough food, scared of becoming my mother, tired all the time, working all the time, and still not getting ahead." "And now?" he asked. She looked at him, her eyes honest and tired but clearer than before. "Now I'm scared of something else," she said. "What?" he asked. "I'm scared that I already had the best thing that was ever going to happen to me," she said, "and I walked away from it." William leaned back slightly in his chair. "You don't know that," he said. "I do know that I never met anyone who looked at me the way you used to," she said. "Not before, not after." He didn't know what to say to that, because part of him wanted to protect himself, and part of him wanted to believe her. "Why didn't you remarry?" she asked. William shrugged slightly. "I dated a little," he said. "But every time things started to get serious, I found a reason to end it." "Why?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Because they weren't you," he said simply. Laura closed her eyes for a second when she heard that. That's not fair to them, she said. I know, he said. That's why I stopped dating. They sat in silence again, but it was a different silence now, not awkward, not careful, just heavy with truth. Annie likes you, William said after a while. Laura smiled faintly. I like her too, she said. She's easy to love. She didn't used to be, William said. When I first brought her home, she didn't talk much. She used to hide food in her room because she was scared there wouldn't be enough later. She used to pack a small bag and keep it under her bed in case she had to leave quickly. Laura looked heartbroken. How does a child learn to live like that? She asked. The same way adults do, William said. By being left. Laura looked down at the table. I left you, she said quietly. Yes, he said. You did. She nodded slowly. And now I know what that feels like, she said. When my husband left, he didn't even sit down and explain. He just told his lawyer to call me. One day I was his wife. The next day I was a problem to be solved with paperwork. William watched her face carefully. There was no self-pity in her voice now, just honesty. I used to be so sure I was making the smart choice, she said. I thought I was choosing security. But I didn't understand something. What? William asked. That the person you choose matters more than the life you choose, she said. Because the right person makes a hard life easier, and the wrong person makes an easy life unbearable. William looked down at the table for a moment. That was the kind of sentence you only learned by living through something you couldn't undo. Why are you really here tonight, Laura? He asked. Not because I invited you. Not because Annie likes you. Why are you really here? Laura didn't answer right away. She looked at him, really looked at him, like she was trying to decide whether she was brave enough to tell the truth this time. Because I don't want to run anymore, she said finally. I ran from being poor. I ran from you. I ran from my marriage when it got bad. I ran from coming back to this city. I ran from this restaurant every time I thought I might see you. She took a deep breath. I'm tired of running, William, and you are the one person in this world I always ran from because you were the only one who ever really mattered. William felt that sentence somewhere deep in his chest. I don't know if we get a second chance, she continued. I don't know if too much time has passed. I don't know if you can ever trust me again, but I know that if I run away now, I will regret it for the rest of my life the same way I regret leaving 10 years ago. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. So I'm here, she said. And this time, I'm not leaving first. William held her gaze for a long time. He could see the fear there, but he could also see something else. Something he hadn't seen in her 10 years ago. Courage, you hurt me, he said quietly. More than anyone ever has. I know, she said. And part of me is still angry, he said. I know, she said again. And part of me is still in love with you, he said. Laura's breath caught, and she didn't even try to hide the tears this time. I don't know what to do with that, she whispered. William reached across the table slowly, not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, and placed his hand over hers. Then we start with dinner, he said, and we see what happens tomorrow. Laura didn't move her hand away when William placed his over it. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Around them, the restaurant continued like normal waiters moving, people talking, glasses clinking, but at that small table by the window, time felt slower, heavier, like both of them understood that whatever happened after this would matter for the rest of their lives. You said we start with dinner, Laura said quietly. And then we see what happens tomorrow. William nodded. Yeah. She looked at their hands for a moment, then back at him. I can't promise I won't be scared, she said. I can't promise I won't make mistakes. Apparently, I'm very good at making big mistakes. William gave a small, tired smile. You already made the big one, he said. Everything else is just life. Laura let out a soft breath that sounded like relief mixed with fear. You're really giving me another chance, she said. I don't know why. William thought about that question carefully, because the answer mattered. Because 10 years ago, I loved you when I had nothing, he said. And now I have everything except the person who knew me back then. Money can buy a lot of things, Laura. But it can't buy someone who remembers who you were before the world respected you. Laura's eyes filled again, but she didn't look away this time. I remember, she said. I remember the tiny apartment, and the broken heater, and how you used to fall asleep with your laptop on your chest because you were working 2 jobs and trying to start a company at the same time. William smiled slightly. I remember you cutting coupons and pretending it was a game so I wouldn't feel bad, he said. They both laughed softly at that, and for a moment, they weren't a billionaire and a divorced woman with 2 jobs. They were just 2 people who used to share a life. After dinner, they walked outside together. The night air was cool, and the street was quieter now. I meant what I said, Laura said as they stood on the sidewalk. I'm not running this time. But I need you to understand something. What? William asked. I'm not the girl you used to love, she said. Life changed me. I'm more tired, more careful, less sure of myself. I don't have fancy clothes or interesting stories, or important friends. I have 2 jobs and a small apartment and a lot of regrets. William looked at her for a long moment. That's okay, he said. I'm not the same man either. I'm more serious, more careful. I trust people less. I work too much. And sometimes I don't know how to relax in my own house. Laura gave a small smile. Annie helps with that, she said. Yeah, he said. She does. Laura looked down at the sidewalk, then back up at him. If we try again, she said slowly, it can't be because of the past. It has to be because of who we are now. William nodded. Agreed. And Annie? Laura added. She comes first, not me, not us. Her. William didn't even hesitate. She always comes first, he said. Laura nodded, like that was the answer she needed. Just then, the restaurant door opened and Annie ran out, with Frank walking behind her trying to pretend he wasn't the one who let her. I knew you were still out here, Annie said, slightly out of breath. She looked between them quickly. Are you both crying or are you both okay? Laura laughed and wiped under her eyes. Maybe both, she said. Annie walked right up to them and looked very carefully at their faces like a tiny judge making an important decision. Well, Annie said finally, you both look less lonely than before, so I think this is good. Frank walked up and stood with his hands in his pockets. I figured the kid should probably be part of whatever decision is being made out here, he said. William shook his head slightly. You're enjoying this too much. Frank grinned. I like happy endings, he said. Then he looked at Laura, not unkindly. Just don't break him again, he added quietly. He worked too hard to become the man he is now. Laura met his eyes and nodded. I know, she said, and I know I don't deserve his kindness, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life being someone who does. Frank studied her face for a moment, then nodded once like that was enough for now. All right, he said. Then I'll save this table for you too. But this time, no more crying into the mashed potatoes. Annie slipped her hands into both of theirs, one hand holding William's, the other holding Laura's. Okay, Annie said, like she was announcing a final decision. Here are the rules. William looked down at her. The rules? Yes, Annie said. Rule number 1, nobody runs away anymore. Laura squeezed her hand gently. Okay, she said. Rule number 2, Annie continued. Nobody eats dinner alone when they're sad. William nodded. That's a good rule. And rule number 3, Annie said, looking up at both of them. We don't talk about what we lost all the time. We talk about what we still have. Laura's eyes filled again, but she was smiling when she said, that might be the smartest rule of all. William looked at Annie, then at Laura, then at their hands, all 3 of them standing there on the sidewalk under the soft light from the restaurant window. 10 years ago, he had lost the woman he loved and thought that loss was the thing that would define the rest of his life. But standing there now, with Annie holding one hand and Laura holding the other, he realized something he hadn't understood before. Life didn't always give you back what you lost. But sometimes, if you were very lucky, and very patient, and brave enough to forgive, life gave you a second chance to build something new from what was left. And this time, he thought, looking at the 2 people beside him, he wasn't going to let fear make the decision again. This story reminds us that life is not about the mistakes we made in the past, but about the choices we make after we realize those mistakes. Sometimes, people leave not because they don't love you, but because they are scared of poverty, scared of failure, scared of an uncertain future. But money, success, and big houses cannot replace the people who loved us when we had nothing. The story teaches us that forgiveness is not about forgetting the past, but about giving the future a chance. And in the end, life is not about who was right or who was wrong, it's about who stayed, who came back, and who chose not to run away when things got hard. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.